Hello everyone, welcome to the course Disability Studies in India, Historical, Social and Culture Perspective. So, in this module we are talking about identity, subjectivity, disability, right. So, as you see the module is theorizing disability, stigma, identity and subjectivity. So, the last lecture I was talking about subjectivity and I covered many philosophers, for example, starting from Descartes to Kant to Derrida, then we also reached to the Baudrillard and many more. In fact, I touched also Husserl's phenomenology. So, the very purpose of talking about subjectivity is to talk that how something, a reality which is not objective, which is very much subjective, the knowledge, the truth, knowledge about the world, knowledge about the life, knowledge about the person, community, society, whatever you name, is produced with that is not objective, that evolves, that changes, depends who is writing that knowledge, who is producing that knowledge, from whose perspective that knowledge is taken. And that is why I also touched upon the very idea of the subject, like we all are subjected to something, subjected to society, subjected. So, our identity is shaped by multiple factors. One of them is culture, politics, economics, family, so on and so forth. They all contribute in producing our identity, and it depends which identity we have perceived and which identity we have taken up, and according to that identity we look at the reality, and that reality becomes very different. And I also touched upon Marx's idea that how Marx reduced everything to the economy, right? Like your condition is being determined by the economic position which you are in, and that if economy changes, even the society changes accordingly. So, obviously, neo-Marxist has something new to say, something new to talk about, right. So, let us say for example, I was talking about what is the contribution of social model of disability. See, remember when I am talking about disability studies, this medical model, social model, charity model, they all keep coming up, and that is why in the beginning itself I made this pretty clear that what is these all models. There was an entire lecture on the models. If you have not seen or read it, please go back and do watch it, so that we can understand what the contribution of these models are. So, for example, when I was talking about the social model, what social model does? It changes the way people look at disability. That is a one factor, right. The contribution of social model is it goes one step ahead and talks about that there is something else about the reality of people with disability. It is not the body, it is not that something is wrong with the body, but there is something wrong with the society. So, rather than forcing people with disability to reconfigure their somatic shape, we must reconfigure our infrastructure, our environment, our social, political, culture environment, and there is something wrong with the society, not with the individual. So, you see, this is not a simple shift, it changes the entire way we look at disability, it changes the entire way we think about the society, all right. So, the deficiency was shifted, there is no deficiency in the bodies. Obviously, we also talked about the limitations social model has, but keeping aside the limitations of these models, we have to also look at the positive aspect that it has on the people with disabilities, like, or adding some new discourse around people with disabilities, right. So, and then when we are talking about the medical model, what medical model does? It shapes, it says that there is a problem with the body itself, right. Body is deficient, individual is a problematic, nothing else is wrong. So, these are the ways through which you can think about the subjectivity, right. So, as long as you think that there is something wrong with your body, you will not be able to give a new fresh perspectives. Even if you give it, people will not consider it, it will not be legitimized. So, therefore, we have to talk about subjectivity. It is not only about subjectivity in the sense that how it is constructed, but it is also about how a subject looks at its subjectivity. All right. So, let us go to the slide number 1. Disability and subjectivity are deeply interconnected realms within the human experience, where the dynamics of identity, agency and social perception converge to shape the lives of people with disabilities. While disability often evokes a focus on physical and mental impairments, its complexities go far beyond biomedical or functional limitations. The concept of subjectivity, referring to unique sense of self and personal agency, plays a crucial role in how people experience and respond to disability. By examining disability through the lens of subjectivity, we gain insight into how cultural, social and personal dimensions contribute to the development of complex, multifaceted identity. So, disability studies often emphasize the socially constructed nature of disability, challenging the medical model that views disability purely as a personal tragedy or physical limitations. The social model of disability argues that disability is created by an environment that fails to accommodate diverse bodies and minds, framing disability as a social rather than individual issues. This perspective suggests that disability is not an inherent to an individual's body, but is constructed through barriers in social, cultural and institutional context that deny equal access, representation and participation to disabled people. All right. So, let me go back for a second and just to explain to you why disability and subjectivity are deeply intertwined. All right. How they both are connected in terms of human experience. So, for example, that how you look at the subjectivity of people with disabilities. Like, suppose if I ask you that you have to look at the subjectivity of people with disability, what will you do? How will you go for it? So, there are two ways to understand. The one as what people has to say about it, what people are talking about people with disabilities. So, if you think let us say there is a data about people with disabilities and you have and you collect and you see that data, and according on that basis you think as a real data and you think that is what the reality of people with disability is. Obviously, you are mistaken, because this is what people without disability think about people with disabilities, keeping in the mind that even among the group there are many categories. So, how is it possible that other group can speak behalf of people with disabilities? That is an injustice. So, one has to go beyond biomedical and functional limitations of people with disabilities, and they have to directly interact with people with disabilities by thinking about, by talking to them and asking what is their experience, what they feel. So, their subjectivity is shaped by the lived realities that they are living. Their living experience is going to constitute their self. So, their self is constituted by the living experience. The living experience may be regulated or shaped by multiple factors that may not be the same for other people, right? That may not be applicable for other people. So, when we are looking at the subjectivity of people with disabilities, we have to look at what are the factors that constitutes their self, because their self is constructed. It's not that it is a kind of a self which is not influenced. It's not like it's not like there is no influence of a culture on the self of people with disabilities. Like, so what is the disabled self has to say about it, right? So, and when they speak about it, when they talk about the life, it will be very different, a very fresh perspective that we will have on people with disabilities. All right. So, let's look at the next slide, please. So, when considering disability through a social lens, subjectivity becomes central to understanding how people internalize, right, or resist societal attitudes. Social construction of disability shape self-perception, influence the way disabled people form identities in relation to their bodies and minds. A society that stigmatizes disability, for instance, might lead to people to internalize feelings of inferiority or limitations, thereby affecting their subjective experiences, right. That is what I was talking about, that how their subjectivity is shaped, what are the factors that has influenced, right, what are the factors. So, maybe stigma is one, right. If you remove this, maybe they will have something new to say, something different to speak. So, positive social attitudes and inclusive policies can empower people to embrace their disability as a part of complex identity that includes but is not limited to their impairment. All right. So, I am not talking about that their impairment is excluded. No, that is not somewhere I am suggesting. What I am suggesting that it is included, but I am challenging this part, stigma part. All right. So, subjectivity in the context of disability is shaped not only by societal attitudes, but also by the unique personal narratives and lived experiences of people. For many disabled people, experiences of navigating ableist environment can contribute to a heightened awareness of their own subjectivity. These experiences, whether they involve overcoming accessibility barrier or coping with discrimination, can strengthen a sense of agency and identity. So, disability can become a source of personal resilience, right, this one, as well as a basis for advocacy and social change. Let me ask you a question. Why is it so that when there is any committee is formed, people say that there should be a representation of that community as well, right. So, you see that after a lot of fight advocate groups, then women started becoming part of any social political agendas, right. In the policy committee, they are being part of it. Why is this so? Because any policy when you are framing, it is not only going to affect one set of people, it is going to affect all the people living under that constitutions, right, or that constituencies. So, if that is the part, women share almost half of the populations. If they are not going to see what is happening, if they are not going to understand what this is going to talk about, how you can think it is universal and applicable to all. So, that is why if you really want to frame holistic policies which you think can help all the people of that that constituencies or that country or that world or whatever, you need to have the representation of all members of the society, right. That is the point I am making, because each one's subjectivity is different, right, or each community's person's subjectivity is different, because it is shaped by multiple factors. So, until and unless we take their experience into the account, how can we form a policy and can implement them, right. What if they see something which is not written, which is not noticed by other members? That is very possible, right. That is very much possible that a person has not gone through that experience, person has not understood, he does not come from that community, and if that is so, how is going to speak behalf of that community? That is a problem, right. So, which is why if you see that if there is any policy, right, there are almost possible, like there are intent that it must be represented by all members of the societies, right, possibly. That is an attempt people should make, people should try, so that we can have a holistic framework to implement any developmental policies. So, this is what I am talking about, that when we are talking about in sense of subjectivity in terms of people with disabilities. So, it is not that their impairment is not part of the identity, impairment is part of their identity, but it is not that they should be reduced to only as if it is one impairment is entire part of their personality, all right. So, we have to make this clear distinction that how much impairment affect how they have internalized the feelings, right, about the discrimination. So, maybe because of the impairment and maybe because of a lot of things, right. How, what is the contribution of their subjective experiences, right? How you are going to change the society, it depends on multiple factors, and one among them is we should take their narratives, their personal experiences into the account as well, and then only we can have then only we can implement and we can have a holistic judgment. All right. So, look at the next slide please. So, subjectivity in the context of disability is shaped not only by societal attitudes, right, but by unique personal narrative. That is the point I was making, that we need to look about it, because it can be a source of personal resilience as well as basis for advocacy and social change. That is important, right. So, these personal dimension of disability, right, this personal dimension of disability emphasizes the importance of CRIP theory, and this is what is given by Robert McOver. Please read his book on CRIP. So, a concept within disability studies that celebrate diverse embodiment, right, diverse embodiment and experience as forms of valid creative resistance to normative standards of ability. So, in affirming the richness and validity of disabled lives, CRIP theory counters narrative of deficiency, loss or victimhood. So, embracing this perspective allows people with disability to reclaim their subjectivity, viewing their experience not as limitations, but as a part of a unique, valuable identity. By embracing their embodiment, disabled people can transcend social stigmas, building resilience and a strong sense of self that defies traditional narrative of disability, right. That is what I have been counting. Why subjectivity is important? Because until and unless we take their experience into the account, we cannot question this traditional narrative of disability. It will keep coming up, it will dominate, right. So, the concept of agency is central to the interplay between disability and subjectivity. So, agency, which I was about to speak on, agency refers to the capacity of people to make choices, take action, exert control over their own lives. Think about it, right. That is why I am sticking to the slide, because these are the important point which possibly you may miss, that agency, right, because agency is very, very significant, and I would suggest to read keywords, right, I am writing here, keywords by Raymond Williams. He has explained alienations and like it's a very wonderful book. So, the concept of agency is central to the interplay between disability and subjectivity. What does it refers to? First, remember, capacity of people to make choices, take action and exert control over their own lives. However, social constraints such as physical inaccessibility, ableism, lack of representation can limit the agency of disabled people. So, despite these barriers, people with disability often develop strategies to navigate, resist and reshape their environment, asserting their subjectivity through these act of agencies, right. So, why agency is important phenomena? First, subjectivity that will lead to agency. First, we have to listen to them, we look at their narratives, what they have to say. Ableism cannot be encountered until and unless we take the experience of people with disabilities, right. So, it is important to take their experience into the account. Second thing is, what does agency refers to? Agency refers to capacity of a people to make choices, but we all know that maximum choices of people with disabilities are made by family members, and their opinion is not also taken into the account, right. So, take action. they should be given the ample opportunities to take action as well, right. They should, it is not like, no, you cannot do this, what if you get hurt, so on and so forth. No, let the person make their choices and take actions. And obviously, the most importantly, like whether you have agency or not, is exert control over their own lives, right. Exert control over their own lives. Like, your life must be controlled by you. It is not that, like, when you are supposed to get up, when you are supposed to go for the breakfast, you should do that, you should not do that. Every time you are being tutored by your guide or by your family members. So, here you see that you do not have that, you are not you do not have agency in that sense, right, because all that choices are being made not by you, but by the other person, right. So, because you feel a sense of satisfaction when you speak something, when you do something and you participate there, right. There is a very minor difference between taking care of a person and patronizing that person, right. Taking care of means what he wants, you should do that. Patronizing means you are not even letting him to say what he wants and you presume that he wants this, right, and that is a problem. That is why I was talking about that when we are making any policies, every people, every community's person should be there to represent their community, because they know better what people of that community want. Otherwise, it is more that someone else is deciding and they have absolutely no idea. So, ableist assumptions can only be questioned, can only be challenged once we have the voices of people with disabilities, their narratives. All right, let us look at the next slide, please. An important dimension of agency is the way it allows people to redefine their identities on their own terms, right. So, it is a very important dimension of agency, is the way it allows people to redefine their identities on their own terms, right. This is what I have been saying, right, redefine their identities on their own terms. So, many people with disabilities develop a positive sense of identity through advocacy, activism or creative expressions, challenging mainstream narratives or what I call dominant narratives that equate disability with incapacity, right. So, by forming communities, pursuing academic or professional goals or engaging in artistic expression, people with disabilities asserts their right to self-definition. So, this process of identity formation underscores that disability, while a fundamental part of who they are, does not encompass the entirety of their being. So, instead, their identity is shaped through dynamic interaction between their bodies, minds and the world around them. So, this is important line I would suggest you that you read, stop, you can stop the video, you can read it, like how identity formation underscores the disability, which is very much fundamental part of who they are, right. So, cultural representation of disability, it has a powerful impact on the subjectivity of disabled people, influencing how they see themselves, how society perceives them. Media, literature and popular culture have long portrayed disability through various stereotypes such as the tragic victim and the inspirational hero. You remember the idea of superhero I have been talking about, right, or the villain. So, these representation can shape perceptions, reinforcing ableist assumptions and influencing how people with disabilities are treated and perceived, all right. So, the point is what I am making here is that self-definition of people with disability, their agency being reiterated constantly, like what is the impact of society on the subjectivity of disabled people. So, they can only do so, they can only talk about what they are. How do you know what they are? How can they represent themselves? How will the self-expression would be possible, how self-expression would be possible. The possibility of self-expression is only when their narratives are written down, their narratives are chalked out on the plane, right, and then only they can self-define, they can give a new definition about their own self, right. It's not like they're being interpreted by someone else, right. Let's look at the next slide, please. So, recent years have witnessed a shift toward more nuanced and realistic representation of disability in media and literature, allowing for more complex view of disabled subjectivity. So, we have films, we have memoir, we have art that was created by disabled people provide alternative narratives. That is what I have been advocating for, highlight the diversity, resilience, the depth of disabled experience. These representations challenge stereotypes, offering audiences the opportunity to see disability through a humanized lens and fostering empathy and understanding. So, that is how we can influence societal attitudes, policies, inclusive representation of disability that can help create environment in which people can assert their subjectivity more freely. All right. So, I have been already explained this to you, that how the interaction between disability and other social identities impact personal agencies, self-perception, social positioning, right. They all are impacted, making the experience of disability far from uniform. So, these intersectionality, when I am saying intersectionality, basically means merging different identities, emphasizes that disabled people are not merely defined by their disability, but also the way in which their multiple identity shape their lives. So, this relationship between disability and subjectivity, right, and that is the entire purpose of bringing subjectivity in this module, is to talk about how it reveals the importance of agency, right, identity and social perception in shaping the lives of disabled people. So, disability is not a fixed minded or monolithic experience, rather it is a complex interplay of physical, social and cultural dimension that influence how people see themselves or seen by others. So, through the development of agency, self-advocacy and resilient identity formation, disabled people continually assert their subjectivity in a world that often marginalizes them, right. So, to conclude my lecture, I would like to say that it is extremely significant that a society can move towards inclusivity, and it can only move towards inclusivity once we talk about the agency of people with disability. How we can talk about agency of people with disability? Once we ask them to express their own subjectivity, we let them speak, we let them express through, we can listen to them their own narratives, then only it is possible. They should be given the enough opportunities and enough platform where they can redefine themselves, not from the ableist point of view, but from their own community's point of view. And because this is important to have a important value for the humanities, is to include every people together. All right. So, with this I would like to end my lecture, and thank you so much for listening to me. See you next time. Take care. Bye bye.